Hello everyone, my name is Kait Malone and welcome back to my true crime channel. I'm really sorry for not posting as much as I want to, but as you can see I have a completely new background, and that is because I am now in Toronto. I flew back to Toronto and I'm actually going to be moving in like a week or two, so the background's going to change once again, and then hopefully I'm going to move into my own place, so it's going to change again. So there's going to be a lot of different backgrounds happening, but just bear with me. I still want to put out content for you guys, and so here we are. Gonna have some change ups. And as you can also tell, the quality is better, and that is because back in Toronto here, I have my good filming camera. So I'm able to film with a higher quality camera. But let me know down below if you like the better quality or if you liked the like vlog camera quality. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Okay, so since I'm back in Toronto, I thought we would jump back to a case from Toronto in the 1980s. If you haven't watched my video on the case of the unsolved disappearance of Nicole Morin, it was a huge case here in Toronto. I highly recommend you go watch that video first and then come back to this video, but it's not 100% crucial. But if you have watched it, you know that I mentioned in it that a lot of other little girls were going missing and being murdered back in the 70s and 80s around the time that Nicole went missing. I was thinking about just making one huge video on all of the cases, putting it all in one, but going through all the evidence for the case I'm talking about today, I just felt like the video was going to either be extremely long or not have a lot of details in it. So I decided I'm going to make an individual video for each case and then put it into a big playlist, which I'll have linked down below, or I'll have a little card at the top that you can click so you can go through and watch all of the videos as I upload them on this topic. And today's case is going to be on the murder of 11-year-old Alison Parrott. So let's get into the case.
Alison Parrott is 4'10", weighs 75 pounds, has blonde hair and green eyes.
Sheer panic. It wasn't real.
Police believe she is the victim of a very well-laid trap.
It was a very high-profile case.
We're after this guy and we're gonna get him.
Alison May Campbell Parrott was born in Toronto on September 28th, 1974. And she was born to a civil engineer father and a mother who was an advertising executive. She also eventually had a little brother, but I didn't find much detail on him. According to her mother, Alison was a spunky, beautiful, determined, happy child. She had the best life that a kid could ask for.
The first day that Alison was born, I held her in my arms. I still remember this vividly. And I looked at her, and the thought that came to mind was, she's very much her own person. And then she became a big sister, a bit of a bossy big sister. And you know, and that's exactly who Alison was. She was very spunky, very determined, filled with life, always laughing. But she was so much her own person.
At the age of 11, she was attending a French immersion elementary school, and as most Torontonians, she would frequently use the TTC, which is our public transportation here, and bus system, subway system, to go to school downtown. Now, I wasn't allowed to take the bus alone until I was like in high school, but we do have to remember that this was back in the 70s and 80s, and people were more trusting back then. They let their kids go out and do things by themselves, and they weren't supervised. So in these cases, we do have to keep that in mind. At the time, Alison and her family lived on Summerhill Avenue. It's more of like a suburb type area. Alison was also an avid runner for the Tom Longboat Track Club. She was said to be a natural leader that trained really hard, and even at the age of 11, she had really good self-discipline. She even convinced her friends to run as well. And all of this won her her first race that summer. And because of that win, she was actually supposed to attend an international track and field meet in New Jersey in August, but unfortunately, she would never attend that meet. And that is because on July 25th of 1986, Alison would end up going missing. And even stranger, it is almost exactly a year to the dot from when Nicole Morin went missing. So let's talk a little bit about that day. Just before 11 o'clock that morning, Alison was home alone and the home phone rang. She answered and was greeted by a male voice. And this man was claiming to be a photographer, and he asked her to meet him downtown at the Toronto University Varsity Stadium because he was going to be taking publicity photos of her and her team. And Alison didn't really question it that much because her team and her name had been in the newspaper recently because of the win that she had, and it kind of just made sense that they'd want to take pictures of her and the team. And on top of that, she actually also trained at that varsity stadium in the previous fall, so she knew the area, she knew the place. So she hung up and she eagerly called her mom to ask permission, and her mother also didn't question this because of all the reasons I kind of just stated. So her mom discussed the route with her that she'd be taking downtown and how to get back home, and basically just told her to be home by 2:30 p.m. that day. It would only be about 4 stops on the subway for her to get from her home to the stadium. Riders would report seeing 11-year-old Alison alone on the subway ride for about 20 minutes during her trip downtown to the stadium. But Alison wouldn't make it home by 2:30, and she wouldn't make it home by 5 p.m. either. So at this point, her parents were home and they were starting to feel uneasy because it wasn't like Alison to not be home by the time she said she was. She would always check in with them. She would always be home. It just wasn't something that Alison would do. Her mother, Leslie, said that she intuitively felt like something was seriously wrong, and so she began to call her friends and asking her neighbors if they had seen Alison, and no one had. And when they still hadn't found Alison, by 6 p.m. they ended up finally calling the police. Just like with the Nicole Morin case, hundreds of people would join the search to try to find 11-year-old Alison Parrott, but she would not be found alive. 2 days later, 2 boys were walking in King Mills Park, which was a densely wooded area at the time near the Humber River, somewhere near Old Mill Station if you live in Toronto, and they would end up finding Alison's body among the trees. The police would determine that she had been bound, raped, and strangled. Now, a Toronto police inspector named Steve Irwin would end up being asked to join the task force. And this is really interesting if you know anything about the Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka case. They're also known as the Barbie and Ken killers. It's a huge case that happened in Toronto, which I would love to cover as well. Actually, let me know down below if you want me to cover that case. But this investigator, Steve Irwin, would actually be involved on the Scarborough rapist case as well. So a hotline was set up, and he would end up spending days on end answering calls from this hotline and following up on countless tips. A reward for $50,000 was also offered for any leads that led to the arrest of the murderer, and 18,000 people were interviewed. Now, you have to remember at the time that there wasn't really many security cameras, there wasn't surveillance everywhere, there wasn't really very good DNA testing, and even though they ended up finding semen on her body, they had no way to test it for DNA. According to the police, the perpetrator had tracked Alison's movement for up to weeks before her murder. They ended up figuring out that an unidentified male caller had ended up going through the phone book and calling everyone with the last name Parrott. This caller would basically call them and ask them if the Alison Parrott who was in the newspaper that was going to attend the international track and field team lived there. And they also figured out that on July 14th, this male caller actually ended up calling the Parrott household, the correct Parrott household. He asked to speak to Alison, but it ended up that she was at a summer camp, and so the babysitter answered, who I assume was taking care of her little brother, and the babysitter basically just took a message and said she wasn't available at the moment. The police also speculated that the murderer may have gathered information at Alison's track and field club, thinking that maybe he tracked her training patterns at this club, and that's how he got to know her and found her. Now, unlike Nicole, Alison's killer would end up being arrested, but it would take about 10 years for this to happen. And so on July 31st of 1996, a man by the name of Francis Carl Roy would eventually be arrested for the murder and rape of Alison Parrott. What's even crazier is that they would find out that he was actually originally questioned by police way back 10 years earlier in one of the initial rounds of interviews. And this was because he used the exact same training facility that Alison did. Now, I kind of gathered that at the time he would have been about 28 years old. So all of this kind of fits the pattern of serial killers and murderers and stuff like that. I just thought it was an interesting little fact that I tried to figure out. Now, at the time when Roy was interviewed, he told police that he had gone for a run that day and then he met a friend at a bar during the time of Alison's disappearance, so he basically said that he couldn't have been involved. Moreover, when Alison's body was found on the 27th, Roy actually ended up appearing at a police station confessing to assaulting a 20-year-old woman at his apartment. So it's all very strange. So he went to court for that, and the following October he pleaded guilty and he was charged $200 plus the 5 weeks that he spent in jail.
Francis Carl Roy had been on parole at the time of Alison's murder. He had been convicted twice for raping teenage girls he had lured away from public places with stories that seemed credible.
It was also found out that Roy was an avid runner with a keen interest in photography, and it was said that he originally came from the Manitoulin Islands, which is in northern Ontario. I've never been there, but I know of that place. And it's just a strange little fact that he came from there. Well, where did Roy go after Alison's murder, you ask? About 2 years after Alison's murder, Roy actually ended up moving across the country to Vancouver, and he attained a job with the city as a youth counselor, claiming to have a degree in psychology from the University of Toronto. And he got this job without a background check. So this man that murdered a little girl, who then also confessed to assaulting a 20-year-old woman, ended up getting a job as a youth counselor. That is crazy. Like, he was still working with children after all of that. Like, I just honestly can't imagine if there's other victims out there from him that are just undiscovered or just haven't reported it. I just feel like this man did not just murder one little girl. He seems too cunning for that. He actually ended up leaving Vancouver and going back to Toronto after a bar fight. So then he was back in Toronto again. So that's great. Like I said, it seems like there was probably more victims out there. It turns out that in 1989, suspicion fell back on Roy again. A man who was arrested in Vancouver actually ended up informing police that they should be suspicious of Roy as a suspect in the murder of prostitutes in the Vancouver area. Roy was actually never charged with any crimes involving any murders in Vancouver. Thankfully, the 2 Vancouver officers who were involved in that case didn't forget the tip, and in 1996 when there was a information hotline called the Violent Crime Linkage Analysis System. So they ended up giving that information to this database. Homicide detectives in Toronto ended up picking up the cold case files and reviewing them. And reading over the initial police interview and other reports from Roy's parole officers, they were actually struck by the inconsistencies and deception in the suspect's story. And in the end, it would turn out that that 10-year-old semen sample would be the reason that Roy is caught. DNA was thankfully what caught this man. The division would end up putting a tail on Roy, and the officers would end up collecting Roy's DNA from a cigarette butt and a coffee cup that Roy threw out, and they would actually end up finding it was a positive match to the semen found on Alison's body.
Scares you because you're thinking, oh my god, like, you know, it's like some ordinary guy that you happen to live with. What if, you know?
What if is the question Misbah Ahmed and her parents are asking tonight. The family of 6 lives 4 doors down from Francis Carl Roy, the man charged yesterday with Alison Parrott's murder. Roy's landlady, who calls him Frank, was also surprised.
I'm scared because I have kids too. He's come sometimes give it money.
Here's where things get a little eye-rolly. After Roy's arrest, he maintained his innocence, and his whole story to why his DNA was on Alison's body is because he said he was taking a run in the park and he came across her body and that he had stopped to pee. See where I'm going with this? He said that earlier that day he had masturbated and that when he seen the corpse, he decided he was going to violate it with his fingers. You see where he's going with this story. And Roy was aware that DNA would place him at the scene, so he came up with this story that makes no sense. No one was buying the story, Roy. So after a month-long trial and 6 days of deliberation, on April 13th of 1999, jury returned a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder. And Roy was automatically sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and there he sits till this day. In 2003, the Court of Appeal of Ontario rejected his appeal, which claimed that police in his interrogation denied him the right to remain silent. Roy, you're staying in jail. No one wants you out. Thankfully, they realized that this man needs to stay in jail and didn't accept his appeal. I'm still wondering about those prostitutes in Vancouver. Like I said, this man has to have more than one victim. Just crazy that they never tied anything else to him. Not to say that anything was good in this case, but the one good thing that did come out of it, if you could say that, is that in May of 1987, her mother, Alison Parrott, who was also aided by people at her advertising agency that she worked at, launched the Canada-wide Stay Alert, Stay Safe program. And if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, I'm pretty sure that you would have seen it somewhere. And this was aimed at children aged 7 to 10. And the program's main objective was to attune children's instincts to dangerous situations, whether that be at home or outside of the home. Hi, this is editing Caitlin from the future. I actually ended up finding a Stay Alert, Stay Safe video from the 90s that I actually remember watching when I was a kid. So I'm just gonna play the intro for it because it's super long. It's like 7 minutes long, but I'll have it linked down below if you actually want to watch it. I actually think it's really smart to play this for kids nowadays. But yeah, I just unlocked a memory I didn't know I had.
It's Bert, it's Gert, and they both come here to say, to take charge of everything. Stay alert.
Hi, I'm Gert, and this is my brother Bert.
Hi, we're here to help you stay alert and stay safe.
Yeah, so follow along.
Watch out, beware, things aren't always as they seem. We'll show you what we mean. Keep your radar working. Stay alert, stay safe.
So yeah, now in present time, Alison's parents are older and her brother is also grown up, and they actually live about 2 hours outside of Toronto, about northwest of Toronto as far as I found. They live at a farm that Alison and her brother used to go to during the summer, and it also said that they spent a lot of joyous holidays there at the farm. Yeah, and that is the case of Alison Parrott. If you have any information on this case that I left out, please leave it down below and we can all have a discussion on it. If you grew up during that time and you know this case, let me know anything that I may have left out as well. I'm very interested in knowing like little details of things that aren't normally mentioned maybe in the media. As always, I'll have some links down below if you want to see some videos on this case and like the longer interviews on her mother and the detective Steve Irwin. I'll have those down below as well. If you guys are still interested in watching other true crime videos, I have a bunch now on my channel, so definitely recommend going and checking those out. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next.